you know, maybe something bad happened there, but it doesn't necessarily, you have to rule all that out, all of it. So Stephen Parasol, I've talked to his sister, and there is something about his case that he needs to be brought home. So I'm I'm training with a woman that does historical human remains detection, which is clandestine graves. And so how these dogs alert on, shallow graves or old bones. And I'm learning that. So it gives, maybe at some point there's some place that Stephen Parasol, there's a place of interest. I could take my dog out there and use him as a tool. I cannot imagine, because, our family member was brought home, but it's that never knowing. And even if it isn't Stephen Parasol, maybe I can help another family in another way using my passion, with dogs, my hobby with dogs, and my passion to help those that are missing or cold cases.
That's Gloria Bobertz, and she's on the hunt for a serial killer. This is the second of 2 episodes with Gloria. If you haven't heard the first, I suggest you go back and listen. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. On a cool September night in Lewiston, a town of nearly 28,000 people along the Snake River in Idaho, 3 young people went missing from the Lewiston Civic Theatre, a community theater in a building originally constructed in 1907 as a Methodist church. The theater was known in the region for producing award-winning musicals and plays and workshops where students could practice reading scripts and performing. The theater attracted many people from the region's rolling green and brown hills and rivers that straddled the borders of Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. 21-year-old Christina Nelson and 18-year-old Jacqueline Brandy Miller, stepsisters who were both students at Lewis Clark State College and who had connections to the theater, were last seen after 9 p.m. leaving Nelson's apartment almost 3 miles from the theater. Stephen Parcell, a 35-year-old who worked as a janitor at the theater, was last seen by police officer patrolling near the theater and his girlfriend, who dropped him off around midnight in order to practice his clarinet and do some laundry. It took the police time to connect the 3 murders to the theater, and it was more than a year and a half before Nelson and Miller's bodies were found in a field by a 14-year-old teenager who discovered the bodies when he went to retrieve a hat that had fallen off his head, 35 miles away in Kendrick, Idaho. Purcell's body was never found. Both Christina and Brandy were found bound with rope that, as some have said, came from the Lewiston Civic Theatre. Kristen, who went by Christy, was Gloria's cousin. In all our coverage of crime, we often talk about the victim, the crime, and their immediate family members, but rarely do we talk about all those secondary victims, their coworkers, their roommates, their friends, and their aunts, uncles, and cousins. What makes Gloria's story somewhat unique is that she's decided to fight back and attempt to solve her cousin's murder. And unlike other similar stories, she has her eye on a particular suspect, the same one that the police have eyed, who knows she's coming for him. Today, we're going to discuss what it's like to lose someone, the many different ways that people can heal from tragedies, and what Gloria has in her mind to offer those who have lost loved ones, those whose loved ones are unidentified or missing. So, the thing that stuck out, Gloria, about what you're saying, you've got, multiple short relationships. You've got the criminal behavior. You've got the association with these situations. You have behaviors like his wife's asking him to clean the dishes and he instead shoots them. He's like checking off all those, he's got early loss in his life. He's checking off all of those boxes that, from just a clinical mental health perspective, that we would say this person is highly at risk or of being a danger to others. Not to say that everyone who goes through those life experiences do that, but they're like a lot of glaring sort of warning signs. And I know he ends up in Washington by 1979, and that's where we get the first known victim in that area. I was wondering, like, in your work, she was 12 years old. That's Christina Lee White. What was Christina like?
She was an active little girl. Her best friend was Rose, and that was Voss's girlfriend's daughter.
Oh.
And that is how that connection was made. She disappeared from 2nd Street, 2nd Avenue in Asotin, Washington. During the Asotin Fair, she had heat stroke. And
that's Christina
White.
That's Christina, yeah.
And Rose's brother was home at that time. I spoke with him. And he said he was home on that day and he was washing the dogs, Afghan hounds. And he wasn't sure if Voss was home or not. And he remembers her sitting under the tree in the front yard.
Was she waiting for parents?
She was waiting. She was waiting for her mom. She had a washcloth around her neck. And I believe that, and this is just, again, my take on what happened, is that Voss offered to give her a ride home. And she, of course, he's an adult. That's her best friend's, mom's boyfriend. Why wouldn't you trust him? And so that's how I believe he got her in the car. And he had a house on 3rd Street. And that's
so he probably had 2 houses. He had one he lived in and then a separate one he owned.
Yeah, he was living, he was basically living with his girlfriend, Patricia Brennan, at the time. And he had another house. He had a house. He owned a home on 3rd Street in Asotin. So it was like between where Christina White lived, and then here's, Voss's house would have been just down the road on 3rd. So that's probably where he took her.
And she's never been found, right?
Correct.
Wow. And one of the things I had been listening to in the Snake River podcast was this, and I think you had talked about this, that Voss later in life was very sort of like active in the community, wrote letters to the editor, and he opposed the draining of a nearby reservoir, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that was an area that and all of the stuff that's happening in Asotin between these houses, is it like a mile away, 2 miles away, or very close to each other?
Maybe at best a half a mile. It is not that far. Asotin is not a very big town. It always struck, when I first went there, it struck me as the all-American town. You have the white steepled church, you have a park, you have the fairgrounds, the baseball fields, very Americana. So that...
Not the kind of place you would expect something like that.
Absolutely not. So here, when you have a 12-year-old girl go missing, and especially in 1979, okay, times have definitely changed and people's views of things have changed. But in 1979, very quiet little town, safe for your kids to play in, don't have to worry about locking your doors. And then all of a sudden a child disappears and she is never found. Her parents, I met Betty White. super, super nice woman. Breaks my heart that she never knew what happened to her daughter. I'm sure she does now. I'm sure there's up there in heaven and you know, but she she is the one that gave me the name. But
Mm.
they were also, they had to be looked at. They were suspect. And that's so hard
The
on,
family's always first, and that's one of the toughest things that
yeah.
often before they're looking for another suspect, they're coming after you. And I think that sometimes while people know they have to be cleared, it starts the relationship with law enforcement quite poorly.
It does, but if it's very, very hard on the family members. But if you have nothing to hide, just get through it, plug through it, and they did. She did tell me that Lance Voss he was right there in her face. He wanted to be part of the search.
During the search,
Yeah,
uh,
he had a white towel around his neck,
a
kind of
white
like,
towel like Christina had around her neck.
yes,
Oh wow! So there's probably some belief, like thinking about that picture in Chicago, thinking about the white towel around the neck. There's probably some belief, right, that
I
he
think,
likes
yes.
to stick it in the face of
You
people.
can't tie me to this, but here's a clue. And he has done that throughout the investigations in the Lewiston area. I don't know. He was brought in and questioned in
Almost like taunting.
what's that?
It's almost like taunting because
Yes, he's taunting. He is taunting.
because
Um,
even if, let's say, hypothetically, he wasn't the one to do it, that kind of behavior suggests even just a flippancy toward the victims' families.
yes, and towards human life.
Right.
Period. Yes, he was questioned in North Carolina. Kayla Campbell. I believe that was in December of 2012.
That was a drowning victim. So,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
he's been questioned now in California in that instance. He's been questioned in the Idaho, Washington murders. Wasn't he also questioned in the, I don't know if it was the Green River Killer or another Washington serial killer?
The Spokane River killings, he was questioned in those, and he gave his DNA. He gave
Hmm.
blood
And then why couldn't that DNA be used?
because he lawyered up and wrote out an agreement, a contract that DNA, his blood, would only be used to be tested in those cases.
Oh, wow.
So it's that to me is also very telling. What do you have to hide? Why do you not want your DNA in a database if you have never done anything wrong? There was an interesting comment that his first wife told me. She said that he had told her that she couldn't get pregnant. He had a low sperm count.
Mm.
And so does that mean that you were, and again, this is just me probably over digesting something or overthinking it.
Mm.
Does this mean that you could be involved in rapes in the
Right.
Bay Area? And I have looked at those too.
Well, one of the interesting things in listening to everything that you're talking about and all the people who have been willing to talk to you, or, law enforcement, police officers, his family, the families of the victims, is you must A, have a way with yourself, but B, it's almost like you may know the victims and the suspect more than the people around them do, because you're able to pull together the pieces. It's a crazy thing to think that you're almost living in the head of a person that you suspect. That's got to be weird. It's got to be strange. Do you ever feel sympathy for him or
No,
other things?
no,
No,
no.
no.
I
Is
do
it
not
ever
feel.
uncomfortable?
I do put myself, and this again is where you pull away because it's you can never have the mind of a sociopath. You can never, truly think like a person that takes a life.
Mm.
But yes, I try to look at things the way he would look at them. Would you want this person as a victim? Would you do this? Just different things. Yeah,
Yeah.
it gets
I
a
re-
little it gets a little overwhelming. I do think that my background in mental health has helped me process that. And then having, friends that are in the mental health field, I go and debrief, you know.
right, right. It's got to be an important thing for, I think, anyone who's experienced a loss like this, even if it's solved, but certainly in these cases are not solved, to have somebody to talk to.
Absolutely. In Diane Taylor's case,
Mm-hmm.
her half sister heard about the documentary being made, Cold Valley, or that it had been released, and she every so often would, Google her sister's name, and that's how she found out about her sister's case being reopened. And she reconnected with family members that she had not talked to in decades. And so that was actually a good thing that came out of the darkness. There was some light,
Right.
that these family members reconnected. But
And could
in
be brought together with these other family members.
right, Denise, who is Diane Taylor's half sister, she reached out to me. And Denise was born 2 years after Diane Taylor's murder. And she was born on the day that Diane Taylor's body was found.
Oh, wow.
She was born on August 3rd. And so there were things that happened in Denise's life that she didn't understand until she was older, that her parents had not, at least her father had not processed Diane's death.
Hadn't recovered. Yeah. And that's a part we don't, I think, ever talk about or don't talk about that much, which is the idea that like these things happen and we look at the victim in sort of 2 dimension. We can never really capture people at 3 dimension. We look at the suspect, but we don't look at all this collateral damage that happens in a family just simply when someone's murdered.
Yeah, it isn't just, it's the victim's family, and then you of course have the suspect's family, and how did this impact them, even though they may be without guilt, but it's guilt by association. Just it is. Betty White said it had a ripple effect, and it does. It
Right.
touches so many people on so many levels. And then the grief. Christy's mom, Christy Nelson, my cousin, I'm in contact with her mother, and she still hasn't processed the grief.
Wow. She
It
thinks about her often.
she would, she said she would rather just bury her head and wish this had never happened. She has a hard time dealing with it. Brandy's mother she had a hard time accepting it. So yeah, the family members, yeah, the dynamics they just could go on and on.
There's this saying that, when you bury your parent, you bury them in the ground, but when you bury your child, they're buried in their mother's heart. And that it doesn't leave you and it's with you. I mean, maybe in some ways in a good way, but I always think about like that moment where you can no longer remember what their voice sounded like or
Yeah.
it's got to be hard. It's got to be hard. One of the things, jumping back to Christina White's case and Asotin, one of the things that I had heard, and I don't know if this is true or apocryphal or I'm combining things in my mind, but my understanding, so small town, all this happens within a half mile of of all these sort of places are a half mile. But then her homework papers were found like 3 miles away on a farm. And then I remember hearing about this weird incident that didn't happen, like, I mean, happened within a year, where this real estate agent had this strange encounter with Voss inside the house. There were a lot of things that that just sort of stuck out. I was curious, what about the homework kind of connected him, and what was the incident with the real estate agent?
Well, the homework was found in a pasture where Rose kept her horse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, and it didn't look like it had been out there very long at all. I mean,
it was loose papers that would
yes,
away.
and there was no sign of the elements destroying it or anything. The real estate woman, he wanted to show her his house, which was on Third. He was getting ready to sell it, and he wanted to show her the basement, and he was adamant. Oh, got to show this to you. And she turned around and she saw something in his hand. Oh. And she asked him, she wanted to see it, and he showed her. And it was like a round ballast, something like
a
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after he showed her, he didn't, he asked her, how many people know you're here with me? And she said the whole office. And then he didn't want to show her the basement anymore. Wow, so she was probably very lucky to have turned around and had seen that he had something in his hand. And
yeah. And she was able to sort of get out. And I know, and tell me if my timing's right, probably one of the most striking things that I've heard about the case probably happened soon after that. But there was, I'm not going to get it right, but there was an ad in the local newspaper, like the Lewiston Tribune or Lewiston Morning Tribune, that had his phone number on it that said something like, it was an advertisement for a dog, right?
Yes.
Afghan bitch, 3 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
What was weird about that?
It had Christina White's name in it. The way it was written out, you could see Christina White's name. That was something that Brandon Schrad, that is doing the Snake River Killer podcast, had discovered. And that and that leads you down another rabbit hole.
Well, because one of the weird things for me about that ad, and I may not have gotten to the episode where you guys dig really deep into that one, but one of the weird things about that ad to me was that it talked about like a spaying fee, right? And you're saying all that were the name. Yeah, but rarely with Afghan hounds do you ever spay them, and I didn't realize he had a dog that was Afghan hound. So I found it kind of odd that you would put an ad in, like, but maybe there was a hidden message in it. Maybe that was
he did have a Norwegian elk hound. And that again is interesting too, because he has Scandinavian ancestry, but he did have a husky, which they look like little husky dogs. But the way he wrote it out, a lost brown husky type dog. And then he gave his phone number. And that's how that ad was found. He did several ads and editorials through the Tribune
that felt like that had messages.
I think there's probably some sort of message in those ads or in those editorials, especially with the Lower Granite Reservoir. When you go up to the area
That's the reservoir he didn't want drained.
Right.
Yeah, you were saying when you go up to there, yeah.
When you go up there, you'll see when your boots on the ground, it gives you a whole new perspective of the cases, the vastness of the area. Where do you go and look? It's, yeah, the clues. And this goes back to a theory that perhaps because he was doing rally car races, that he was leaving clues and crumbs, so to say, as to where his next where he put victims.
Oh, that they were built into because in rally car racing, you have these messages that you put in
Yes.
words and other things like that.
You have symbols, so if you went out, like he was adamant about Christina White having Asotin 128 on her license plate. Well, that was never mentioned any law enforcement reports, or family members, her brother and sister don't remember that. So if you're looking at it and you look at it on a map, 128 is the road, the highway that goes up and over the Red Wolf Bridge over there. And there's
that's
also
where Christina David was found.
Right. And you can also take it over to the Lower Granite Dam Reservoir.
Oh, wow. Could you tell us a little bit about, let's say, Christina David and what happened at the funeral? I mean, what happened at the theater? Because I know that there's some sort of like Christina David is the loosest connection in terms of the cases, but I'm always curious about her and curious about the people who are in the theater and what happened in that theater that night.
Well, Kristen David, I'm in touch with her sister, and Kristen David was politically active. She was, so was Boss. She was a seamstress at the Lewiston Theater, which so was Patricia, Boss's
Wife.
Yeah. Well, at the time it would have been, no, it was his wife. After Kristen David, after her body was discovered, I believe he was married to Patricia on July 28th. Anyway, there are connections that link her to Boss possibly knowing who she is. But then again, you're back to the MO, which is dismemberment, which is that's a whole different level. Yeah.
Yeah. And different than what happened with Brandon, although you have two people that haven't been found. So
right. And so therefore it's, you don't know. Maybe this is something he likes to do. So Kristen David, they've looked at other suspects, Harry Hantman being one of them.
Serial killer.
Yes. So I always keep her though in with, it's the 5 victims there.
Yeah. She's in your heart too, regardless.
She is. It's like, you're traveling so far on this journey, you can't just say, nope, I'm not going to look at that anymore. No, I'm going to advocate for her as much as I possibly can.
I was actually talking to retired FBI agent not too recently, and I brought up like dismemberment and that all the weird things that I have interests in. And one of the things they said to me was really interesting. Like dismemberment can be a part of the fantasy. It can be a part of the method, but it just might also simply be convenience in some cases as the best way to get rid of a body. So that always struck me that some of the things that motivate killers are very different than anything we could imagine.
And I understand being the best way to dispose of a body because, a body is dead weight. And that's your body takes on an extra, amount of weight to it when you pass. And so the dismemberment is a way of disposing. Yes. I always thought that in Kristen David's case, it might have been like you've got the 4th of July coming up, a shock factor, because just Dismemberment does hold that, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because that happens in 81, right? And
Correct.
then I think the theater, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'd love to hear more about what happened on that night, happens in 82. But I was going to ask you, what was the town like during that time? It must have been absolute panic. You find one college student who's cut up in bags underneath a bridge, and then all of a sudden you have, within a relatively short period of time, I imagine there weren't that many murders, you have two college students and a 30-year-old man just disappear. What do you have you gotten any insight from people about what it was like then, or from your family members about what it
It
was like?
was it was something that impacted their lives. From the people I have talked to, they never they never thought something like that would happen in that town. Because it is a very, it's not a small, it's grown substantially, but you don't think about murder, children going missing, or any of any of that. And they were afraid. A few of them said, yes, I was afraid. And no, I wouldn't let my children out. I wanted to know where they were. And so it yeah, you're scared. People are scared. I think it changed the tone of how you lived in that area. You started locking your doors. You started paying attention.
Yeah, and so
I
many so many of those murders around that time kind of like, I think for so many Americans, just broke our understanding, kind of like broke the shell that we used to sort of understand the world. We thought not our neighborhoods, like, or not this place.
exactly, and that's what impacted me. It had my cousin Christy. It's like, oh my God, somebody took her life. Somebody murdered her.
My
Um,
parents lived in the Washington, D.C. area when Sheila and Catherine Loyne disappeared from, it was like the White White Oak Mall, I think, in Montgomery County. And I remember years later, I was in my 30s, and my dad told me that it changed the way we were raised, and I never really thought what kind of impact that, for even people who didn't know the victims. And, he said, you were all on a shorter leash, our doors locked, the way we lived and interacted with our neighbors was complete. That sort of like everything changed for the victims' families and the community when something like this happens.
I know when I see children or I see young adults out at dusk, there's nobody watching them. It it puts me on alert.
Mm,
It's like there are monsters out there. They may not look like monsters, but they are truly monsters. And it makes me sick to my stomach when I see that. It's like, put your phone down, get those earbuds out. You got to be more alert and aware of what's around you.
how do you think it changed your parents or the way that you were raised?
I was already, an adult.
Mm,
Um, my sister, who is 4 years younger than I am, my mom and my grandmother they wanted to know where she was at. They were more vigilant. And I became more vigilant of what she was doing. It's like, if you don't know this person, you don't go with this person.
mm.
Because there's a sense of innocence to my sister, as there is with lots of other people, but they only see the good in people. And I worried about that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So, what was it? I guess this brings us to that night at the theater. What is it that happened? I know you've sort of intimated and hinted that this is probably the most significant connection. Oh well, I guess more than White, Christina White's disappearance in this one is the most significant connection. But what happened at the theater I guess that was September 14th, 1982.
It was September 12th, 1982. And Stephen Parasol had been working on a set with Lance Voss. And Stephen went to a party that was being held at Tomato Brothers, which is in Clarkson, Washington. And Voss at the time, he went down to the Red Baron Pizza. And he said that he watched the movie The Fog and that it got over at midnight, which it didn't. It got over at 11.
Was the Red Baron close to the theater?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
the Red Baron Pizza is probably, I would say, half a mile, 3/4 of a mile down the hill from the Lewiston Civic Theatre. My cousin Christy lived, I would say probably 4 blocks or more away from the Lewiston Theater. But she had left a note that she was going to the store. And so it's a theory. We walked the way they might have walked, Christy and Brandy, that they crossed paths with Voss near the Red Baron Pizza because they had to pass by there to get to Safeway.
And so and because they all knew each other.
Right. Christy had hung some artwork up at the theater. Brandy was always around Christy. Christy had worked as a janitor at the theater, so Voss had been doing plays there for quite some time. So that's probably how their paths crossed. That's how she knew Stephen Parasol. My cousin knew Stephen Parasol through the theater. And so it's theory that they crossed paths down the road, and he might have persuaded them to get in the car so he could take them up to the theater, so he could, show them or tell them the set and blah, blah, what he'd been doing. And they probably went with him because, they knew him. And Stephen Parasol was dropped off by his girlfriend, and it was witnessed by his girlfriend, a couple other friends, and law enforcement at Lewiston that he went into the theater and never came out. And Voss puts himself in the theater. He said that he went there after having watched The Fog and having a beer. He went back to the theater. He started working on the sets. He was up in the rafters. He fell. He hurt his back. And he went and laid down in what's called the green room there. And the acoustics in that theater, if you're walking in, you can't not hear somebody, especially if they're, playing a clarinet or they're doing laundry, because the room that he said he laid down in is right there where Stephen Parasol would have been doing his laundry. So,
wow. So have you been in the theater yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
I've been in there a few times. You can't go in there. It's been condemned.
What do you do when you go there?
Probably going to sound corny. I look around, I feel, listen to your gut. And then I also, every time I've gone to Lewiston, even though now you can't get into the theater, I always go there and I sit on the back steps, and there's a green door, and off to the right of that is some windows that are like almost ground level. But I go there and I sit and I ask the universe show me. If I'm meant to see something, please show me. And I ground myself there.
Is it strange to be in the place where your cousin may have died?
Yes. Oh yeah. It's you just know that this is the last place that she drew a breath. This is the last place where her energy was, her energy, Brandy's energy, Stephen. And Every time I go there, I go and sit and I ask for a sign. Where am I supposed to look? What am I supposed to do? Kind of show me universe what it needs to be done. I have gone out to where where Christy and Brandy, their bodies were found, and there's nothing there. There's residential housing that's being put up there, but I don't feel them like you do at the theater.
The
Yeah.
theater. Yeah. Yeah. What and there was something, right, that connected the place that they were found, that connected them to the theater.
When they went missing, there was some road work that was being done on Highway 3 outside of Kendrick. And you can see where the road used to be, and then they raised it up. So that route, though, is a route that he would have taken when he worked for Frito-Lay. And he could have gone up that route and then over and into Moscow. And I've traveled those routes just to see the timing, just to see what it looks like.
One of the weirdest things about all the locations that you're talking about, and it just dawned on me, that in the recent case from last year with the 4 students at the University of Idaho who were murdered in their home, the suspect in that case traveled to like Clarkston. It just dawned on me, and traveled to Lewiston afterwards. And I remember reading the probable cause affidavit, mentions him crossing the Red Crossing Bridge, mentions him being in the area, I think it's Genese, where Christina David was last found. She was a student at the University of Idaho. Was that triggering for you guys at all?
It's actually, I was contacted by a few people. They wanted to know if Boss was in the area. It's like, no. But it's
also makes me wonder whether the suspect was following his path.
Oh, I can guarantee you he was following it. He will listen to any. Yeah, he has his finger on the pulse over there as to what's going on. That kind of brings me to the point of when he moved in 1998, 1999. Something, I believe, spooked him. And part of that is the Lower Granite Dam. I believe they were doing some work on that. They were expanding a place called Modi Park. They were cleaning it up. I've been there. I took my dog in there.
And that's in Washington? Or
it's in Idaho. Both. Actually, the Lower Granite Lake Reservoir is in Washington, I believe. It is.
So
I have to think because it's so close. But I think something triggered him because he left a house that he bragged about, pulled up roots, and went to live in an apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, and took a job as a car salesman.
So he went without a job.
Yeah, he found a job online. I spoke with Patricia Brennan's father.
His wife's dad, okay.
And he was the one that told me, yes, he found the job on the internet, pulled roots, and left. And so why would you leave, you've taunted the police. You're laughing at them. Did the police find something that spooked you? Did something in the area get too close to where you put the bodies? Spook you? I feel something spooked him. So
you mentioned Patricia Brennan's dad. In communicating with him, do you view the suspects' family members as victims too?
Do I consider them as victims?
Yeah, to some extent.
In a way, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, no, because I feel that they might possibly know something, at least the stepson, Clint, and he's too afraid to say anything. Rose, honestly, I don't think she knows anything. She was surprised to hear about others,
Mm.
other victims. Detective Jackie Nichols and I went up there and met with her. I want to say it was in 2011. Very simple woman, probably has Asperger's or autism, somewhere on the spectrum, higher functioning, but did not seem to be a malicious person. Invited us into her home, which was it was very simple. It wasn't what you would expect Walter Brennan's, great granddaughter to be living in. I did notice when I was in the home that there weren't any pictures of Patricia or Voss, but her, I would say she was a victim of not being able to be around her mother, because of Voss. She was sent off to live at the Lightning Creek Ranch up in Enterprise, Oregon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do I think Patricia's a victim? No. I think she knows things, and
Has
she,
become complicit.
yeah. I had spoke with her. I spoke with her probably 10 years ago. And I want to hear Boss's side of the story. I want to hear it. I want to
So
ask
you,
him
you'd
questions.
sit down, you'd sit down and talk to him.
Yeah. Yes, I would. Yes, I would.
Have you thought about what that would be like?
Um, yes. I have questions that I would ask. It would be, certain things need to be cleared up. I mean, if you're innocent, let's hear why you're innocent. You won't do anything to help prove your innocence, such as taking a lie detector test, such as maybe giving your DNA. You've gone to great lengths to cover that, make sure that is never used. Jayson, I don't know. And again, you go back to the anger.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what I cannot fathom is, you know, if he denied it or if he stuck it in your face. Like, how would you possibly control that anger?
It We're back to, I better channel it in a way that will be beneficial for the victims.
It's about putting them first.
Yes, yes. And then when it's all over and done, you can go and scream someplace, throw rocks, break glass, whatever you have to do to get that out. But I do want to hear, though, his side of the story. I've torn his life apart. I have thrown him under the bus every possible chance I get. And it's not just, I'm not doing this to be malicious. I am not. This is more like public awareness sort of thing, that these people are around you. And I want answers. I want answers. I want justice. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense to me. I was I was just thinking about, what do you think? And I think this could be instructive to sort of like anyone in this situation. Because, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence here, a lot of things pointing in his directions. What do you think that it's going to take to solve the case?
I think it will take. I don't. I've seen cases where they prosecute without a body, but I do believe it'll take some sort of forensic evidence to bring him in. There is a whole load of circumstantial evidence. I don't know if there are plans to go and talk to him about all this circumstantial evidence that keeps, piling up. And like I said, the last time I know he was spoke to was about Kayla Campbell. in North Carolina and her drowning death, and because she lived in close proximity to him. And
that was a young woman who
yeah, she
went
was,
missing on a bike too.
yeah, on a bicycle.
Same neighborhood, right? Men's
Yes,
Hill.
yes.
I was going to ask you another question. Like, what lessons do you think from your experience, either on an emotional, intellectual, or other level, do you think you could, I don't know, pass on to others whose loved ones' cases are cold, or to investigators who find themselves in similar situations?
Well, again, if you are a family member or friend of a victim, educate yourself and advocate for that person. Be their voice, the best voice that they could have. And if you're in law enforcement, I guess take some trust and, use the help that, they want to give. I know that some information about cases cannot be given out, but you can give, basic stuff. And,
Mhm.
they only have so much time that they can spend on cold cases, and they only have so much money that they can spend on cold cases. And that includes testing, forensic testing, and such as that. And when it comes to small counties, such as Asotin County, where Detective Jackie Nichols works, one test, and you have blown your whole budget for forensic testing for the year.
Yeah, we
So
tend to think of police as like having unlimited budgets, and it's
people
not.
do, and they don't. There are budget lines, and this is what you use this money for, and this is how much time you can spend on these cases, and blah blah blah. And that's just the way the system is set up. But if you're, like I said, if you're a family member or friend and you think that you can help, by all means, contact them. Keep your emotions in check. Do not lose your cool. Do not start crying. Do not get emotional, because that's not going to help in any way. It is not going to, you will shut, and I don't mean this in a bad way, you will shut law enforcement down. They don't have time, you
Because
know.
then it becomes something else. You have to manage. I remember I was just thinking about like all the frustrations that must come with like trying to solve something like this, particularly when you have a suspect. And I remember talking to a detective who was in Baltimore, and he was working on a cold case, and I said to him, like, how do you do it? I was looking at all the frustrations and rabbit holes and disappointments, and then retrenching and going back again. And he turned to me and he looked at me dead in the eyes and said, because I speak for the dead, that's my job.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought to myself, that was so powerful. And
And
it sounds like that motivates you too.
it does. I totally understand what he's saying. It does. They cannot talk anymore. They're gone. So if you're going to advocate for them, be the best you can be. Be the best voice. Think before you speak. That's definitely come into play.
Right, right.
I'm using a resource that is a different sort of resource to learn from. I'm in touch with a forensic psychologist. She interviewed the toolbox killers,
Oh, yeah.
and, and she has been doing research for over 10 years on San Quentin death row. So
And the toolbox killers, were they the ones who they were like two rapists and serial killers that did they work together? They worked together?
yes, they did work together. So, like I said, you will never have the mind of a serial killer. You will never have the mind of a sociopath. You can take it so far, and then because you're not hardwired that way, you don't know how to think like that. It becomes too dark and not natural. So anyway, I have a friend, and she has put me in contact with serial killers on death row. in San Quentin. Now, death row no longer exists in California on death row. So they're, at least after, I think it's October 1st, it won't exist anymore. So anyway, I'm in touch with serial killers, and I've been talking to them. And I don't think I would be able to do, well, I probably could, but with having mental health backgrounds, it's helped me, okay, this is what I'm doing now, and I'm going to walk away from it, and I'm going to journal, and I'm going to process this, because again, it's hard to, talk to somebody that's taken a life, or try to understand why they took a life, or to even understand why they're hardwired this way.
But I get what you're saying. It's almost like for some of us, we can go into an almost clinical mode.
Yes.
We're hearing really horrible things.
Yes. I definitely put on my mental health hat.
Well, because you've got to be able to compartmentalize when you're doing something like this, or it will take over your entire life and your every emotion and thought. And
yes.
Yeah. Probably would be no time for rescuing animals or doing everything.
Well, that's what I do when I visit my animals when it's getting too intense. But I've talked to these people, and I'm pulling away some really good insight. One of them is, he has been in for 30 years. He was the youngest person put on death row in California. And he has been housed, or he was housed with Ramirez, the Night Stalker. And so in talking to him, one of the things he said to me, because I've always thought Stephen Parasol was collateral damage. Wrong time, wrong place.
Yeah, showed up and the murder was ongoing. And
yes. So this particular inmate said to me, he said, he won't be in his cemetery, not in my cemetery. And I'd never heard that term before. I was like, not in your cemetery. He said, no, you want to go the opposite direction, or somewhere where, his fantasy would not be interrupted. So
it's almost like this blemish on his fantasy that you want to get it away from.
Exactly. So, hearing that, it was like, okay, now, not that it gives you another, because it's, again, the area is so vast, but where could I go that's the exact opposite of this? And where have I heard that he could possibly be? And does this, tie into road rally races and the clues that were already left?
Or almost possibly a place he would never go.
Possibly, yes. A place that maybe, he might check every so often, but it's not on his regular route of, going places or seeing. Anyway, so that, hearing something like that, and then, the fantasies, how they process what they've done. They play games. There's one in there that he's probably, I want to say, he's probably responsible for at least 8 deaths of people. But one of his victims, the head was never recovered. So he says that he put it in water and put a cinder block over the top of the skull. And he's convinced that nobody will ever find this. So it becomes a game,
I'm just curious about one thing, Gloria, as sort of like wrap up. I was thinking that in some levels, this is like a part of your healing process, and not everyone is going to have the fortitude to go into the dark places that you've gone, or even to search in the proximity, or even, do something like go back to the theater. What recommendation would you have for other people who don't have that, but still need to heal?
You read as much as you can, take in as much as you can, but always be aware of what your breaking point is. It could be part of my healing process to process my grief. I have an incredible thirst for knowledge. That could be part of it. But for those out there that are trying to learn more or why, I would say read. I would say, watch documentaries. But again, if it's starting to get to you, turn it off. You don't need that self damage. You really, really don't.
Because it's almost like letting the killer haunt you long
Hmm.
after they've committed their crime.
One of the things that I'm also doing is I'm training a cadaver dog.
Oh, neat.
And I never thought that I would, I have a love for animals, I have a love for dogs, but it's also, it gives you knowledge as to how law enforcement, interprets those, what the dogs find,
Hmm.
um, how they go about using those dogs.
Combines your two hobbies.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a hobby.
Chasing
Well,
serial killers and dogs.
yeah. Um, but it's educational because you say like a dog, you have a dog out, and let's just say for just whatever, just theoretically, the dog goes to the Lewiston Civic Theatre. Now, just to clear everything up, there has been a dog at the Lewiston Civic Theatre. Jackie took a cadaver dog through there, her cadaver dog that she trained. But say like you're out there and you're outside and the dog, takes an interest in an area. That doesn't mean that something, awful happened there. It could be so many different reasons that the dog is choosing to take interest. It could be somebody at one time bled there. It could be, you know, maybe something bad happened there, but it doesn't necessarily, you have to rule all that out, all of it. So I, right now, Stephen Parasol, I've talked to his sister, and there is something about his case that he needs to be brought home. So
Mm.
I'm working with a woman, I'm training with a woman that does historical human remains detection, which is clandestine graves. And so how these dogs alert on, shallow graves or old bones. And I'm learning that. So it gives maybe at some point there's some place that Stephen Parasol, there's a place of interest. I could take my dog out there and use him as a tool.
And help bring him home. And help.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I cannot imagine because, our family member was brought home, but it's that never knowing that, and even if it isn't, Stephen Parasol, maybe I can help another family in another way using my passion, with dogs, my hobby with dogs, and my passion to help those that are missing or cold cases. So,
Yeah. I wanted to go ahead and I appreciate the conversation. It's been, so powerful for me. On a number of levels. One, obviously, my interest in the case, but I think two, so rarely get to hear from voices like yours for the people who are the family members or the other people who are impacted by this. And often when we do get to hear about it, it's because some tragedy has befallen them as well. We don't often get to hear sort of a more sort of powerful and positive story. And I love the idea of you being able to not just pursue this case, but take what you have to go help other people. So I wanted to ask you just for some closing thoughts. And one thing I'm just very curious about is what outcome would you like to come out of all of this?
uh, if it, boy, if you're talking about, this cases being solved, that would
Anything.
be wonderful. You know, But maybe somebody hearing this will go, okay, I can do this. I can help in some way. I hope that makes sense. An outcome though, the perfect outcome would be for Lance Foss to be arrested, or at least questioned, and for those that are missing to be brought home in these cases, such as Christina White and Stephen Parasol.
Right. That makes so much sense. Well, thanks again for joining me, Gloria. I really, 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 really appreciate all this time you've generously given. My hope is that, one, people will hear this, and if anyone knows anything about these people or these cases, or, they may be able to contribute. But I also hope that other people who are going through similar things, similar loss, learn something. And the loss doesn't have to be a murder, but learn something about how you've channeled kind of your pain and your anger into something good. Because I think that there's something all of us could learn from that.
Yes, I do believe so.
This is Jayson Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook. We'll see you all again next week.